Okay, so we've already talked about the relationship of orthographic to isometric. Now we're going to take what I like to call cube visualization puzzles and generate a 3D object looking at these views. So let's see, we'll start here. This one is a little bit simpler. All of these cubes, the proportional relationship of all of the sides and the volume that this sits in is a cube. And one thing with these puzzles I've tried to do is try to create them in a way that they are subdivided into quarters. This is a quarter of the way up. This is 3/4 of the way up, that top face of the cube. This is half. So quarters, thirds, and halves. And we'll look at how that works. Now, I have some isometric grid paper here for the purposes of this exercise. And what I want to point out, I'll use my red pen, is that this angle right here is the same angle, 30 degrees, as you see in our illustration sheet. So let's do this one. I'm going to construct it in freehand and then come back in with a straight edge to kind of clean it up again. So I'm going to start over here. I'm going to think about the leading edge of this cube. Since it can be divided into quarters, then I'm going to use one grid unit to represent 1/4 of this entire cube. So I'm going to start here. The bottom of the cube is there. It's going to be 4 units high. And I'm going to try and sketch, that's a little dark. I'm going to try and sketch somewhat lightly. 4 cube units to the left. Excuse me, that's to the right. 4 units to the right again. 4 units tall. Notice how I'm rotating my paper. Trying to set myself up for success and drawing a straight line. And so I'm going to start by just sketching in the cube. So here's an isometric cube. If I want, I could go ahead and ghost in the back edge of the cube as if this thing was invisible or a transparent material. All right, so let's start looking. I want this direction to be the front. And so that would make this the right. So I'm looking at the front. And if I start to try and dissect this thing, let's see, let's look at the front and the right in conjunction. So if I look at this point right here, this is the key point. These 3 key points, I think, are the ones that are key on the front. And they exist on the right view here and here. They exist on the left view there and there. So this triangle with an extension exists on the front of this cube. And so to find this point, I'm going to go to the center, halfway over, and then 3/4 up. To find this point, I'm going to come right here. It's just 1/4 up. It's all the way to the right edge of my front view. And then the same thing mirrored to the other side. So I'm going to draw this line in and this line in. Again, rotating my page. Now, let's see. From there, my form goes back away from me, and it goes halfway. So I can go from here over to there. That's halfway. And then the top, I can go from here back to there. That also is 2 units. And then I can connect the dots, basically from here to here. And then, let's see, the rest of my object is basically half of a cube. So I'm going to go up, and then I'm going to sketch over, and then I'm going to sketch down. And that's my object. So now I can take my straight edge and darken in my object lines. And then we'll look at this and the views in a little bit more detail in just a second. There's an object line here, one here, the back edge of my cube, bottom. There's an object line here, an object line here, an object line here. An object line here, an object line here, and then an object line back here, across the top, right here, right here, and then right here. And so there's my object. So that's a three-dimensional representation of this object. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is a little bit more complicated, but we can introduce another thought here. Oh, let's look at this real quick. So from a front view, I see those lines. From a top view, I see this line, and that line back there, which are these three lines, and then the top of the half cube. If I flip this around and looked at the back, notice that I would see kind of this A-frame, but it would be construction lines. And then the right side, which we see kind of here, I don't see anything up in this zone because the object stops at that height. And then from the bottom, I have a flat plane on the bottom, but I would see that A-frame again, this area, as construction lines, as hidden lines. All right, so let's look at this one. Now, there's one thing about this that makes this just a little bit more complicated than the last, and that is that this distance, this distance right here is 1/3 of my cube. This is a quarter, that's a quarter. And so we need to figure out how to get to 1/3. Let's start again the same way that we did earlier. And I'm just gonna sketch the overall cube lightly. Notice again, I'm rotating my page. I hope you're not getting dizzy. And so here's my cube. Again, I want this to be the front, this to be the right side, this to be the left side, this to be the back, the top, and the bottom. And so let's take this from the front. Let's see. From the front, if I rotate this to the left, when I'm looking at this side, it looks like that's just a solid face. And I can see that again from the back. So the left is just a solid face. The front, I think that what I'm looking at, that line is the same as this line. So basically, that front view, I go from corner to corner. And then I step over, let me go ahead and sketch in this and that, because if I took a mirror of that line and carried it to the back, it would be right here. I think that I probably could better position this cube in the future for future exercises. But let's just say I want to draw from this top view. Let me just draw the top view on this top surface. And as I mentioned, this is 1/4 of my cube. That's another 1/4 of my cube, but it goes over. So it would be here and here, but it goes over and it goes all the way to the top. It goes over 1/3. So it's not quite all the way to 3/4 of the distance from this top left edge to the top rear right edge. It's 1/3. And there's a way to calculate thirds and halves with some extra construction. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to draw in diagonals from corner to corner. And we'll see this prove out. This works not only in isometric views, but also in perspective views. That's halfway. Where that X meets on that surface is halfway. Now, if I go ahead and bisect that top surface going through that halfway point with a construction line, and then I draw a diagonal from here to where that halfway point intersected, right there, where this diagonal and that diagonal meet is actually a third. And it could be a third of the way back, or it could be a third of the way this way. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just try and draw a 30-degree line that goes through that point. That's a construction line. And I'll actually go ahead and make it into an object line. And I'll go ahead and finish this top surface here. And I'll come from this point straight down. I'm looking at this line or this line right here. So it's this line and this line are the same line. And it's gonna stop where I can no longer see it. And again, I'm not directly on my grid, but it's gonna come down to there. And then I would have object lines. Again, this is like this full face looking at my left view. This is left. I wanted this to be the front. I've totally messed this up. We're gonna redraw it in just a second from a different vantage point. The same object, but looking at it differently. One thing that I like to do, and it's also practice with my sketching mechanics, is I like to shade the right facing surfaces with a simple hatch. And so I'm gonna go it's not any of the angles that are in my isometric, but I'm gonna choose kind of a slightly different angle, and I'll sketch the surfaces independently, or hatch them independently. And you can see I'm not perfect, but it's probably not going to matter. What this does is it helps the viewer somewhat visualize which surfaces are facing right. I'm kind of assuming that there's a light source coming over my cube from over my left shoulder. All right, let's sketch this one more time from a better view. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. So I'm going to go 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, and 4. Let me do this correct. So the face that I had for the front, earlier I mentioned that I'd like for this to be the front on the first cube that we drew. That's front. Here, what I drew was the front is actually facing in this direction. But I want the front coming this way. And so if that front has that triangle wedge to it, I can draw that over to there, and I can go again, repeat that on the back side. What we did earlier was we constructed this top plane. That's kind of a plateau here, and it's a quarter of the way in from from front to back, and then 2/3 of the way, which I could estimate, or I could construct it again. So let me sketch in just some construction lines for that top plateau. I don't know where it stops yet. Let me do the same thing that we did earlier, which is, and this really comes in handy in perspective more so than isometric. I've got some shortcuts I could take with isometric, but I want to reinforce this idea that I can take this and I can bisect that top surface. So I have I have a line right there, and I can go from this corner to that new intersection and divide that half, and where that meets this original diagonal line, where it intersects that line, that gives me a third of the way back. I'm going to see a lot more about this view. Now comes a little bit of a challenge. I've got this vertical line that's coming off, and so that vertical line is one of these vertical lines. It's actually the one on the far side. And I've got the one close to me, which again, it's not right on my grid, but I've got that too. And so somewhere in here, that's going to stop, and it's going to meet a line, an object line that I have to draw somewhere in here, and an object line that I need to draw somewhere in here. And there's a couple of ways to construct this. One would be that I quite simply redraw as a construction line this line right here, but starting right there. And it's going to go from there down to here, and it's parallel. In isometric, it will be purely parallel. And so where this intersects right here, now all of a sudden I can walk that line around my object and back to there, and that defines where this vertical line stops. It defines where this vertical line terminates or intersects with this larger plane. And then I have this line right here. And then I won't see all of this construction line. It's going to stop, hidden by that plateau, and then continue down. And like I've done on these other two, I'm just going to hatch only, and this is the simple way. I'm going to only hatch the purely right facing surface to, again, just help me visualize what's happening. And then we haven't really got into line weights yet, but I feel like I can even clean this drawing up a little bit more if I add, I've got my Papermate flare tip pen here. And I'm just going to draw in and darken in some of these additional lines. And maybe it'll help me visualize this. Let's see, I'm gonna put one right here because I think that there's nothing behind this edge but air. Maybe I'll do that on the top too. What I am not going to darken in would be edges that kind of face me. Like this one, I don't want to darken that in, I don't want to darken that in, I don't want to darken that in, but maybe I'll hit all the others. One thing about my mistake, and I'm sorry if it was frustrating, is it is an opportunity to learn that sometimes the choice of the view with which you choose to illustrate an object or a design can really play an important role in how well the viewer can see the object. From this view, it's difficult to see. It's difficult to see what's happening with that three-dimensional object, whereas this view shows that object off much better.